Bitcoin futures getting ready to open, and the bullying has got to stop. What's up, everybody? Welcome aboard to Bubba's Bottom Line. This is Todd Bubba Horwitz, and of course, we do our daily updates, and we do once a week. We do our show, and of course, here we are. Markets themselves had a pretty interesting week last week. If you look at it, if you go back to last Monday, we had a key reversal where all of the major indices opened on their highs and closed on their lows, which would indicate the market top was in. And of course, somewhere around Wednesday morning, they decided that they no longer wanted to go lower. And by Friday, the Dow and the S&P both had new closing highs, not new all-time highs, but new closing highs. And of course, the markets rallied. You know, there's a lot of reasons you can look at the markets for rallying, and one would be that they just don't want to go down right now. The other would be, you could say that the jobs number was exceptionally good, which we will debunk. The jobs number is crap. Again, you know, the lack of wages, the lack of growth is really just another story that we continue to ignore. Again, I find it challenging and fascinating that nobody wants to talk that people are making less money. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that you are paying or spending more than you're making easily. And of course, we are depleting our savings once again after saving so hard. But of course, the cost of living, you know, without that BS inflation that the Fed wants to talk about, continues to go away from us. And I think this is more of the issue. So we can brag about this 4% unemployment or whatever the heck the number was, and the 200 and some $1,000 jobs that were created. But we're not creating good jobs. We're creating just more crap. And I think that this is a bigger story. But again, it has nothing to do with the markets. The one thing we have to always remember is that the markets and the economy are not related. All right, that's a given. Let's not kid ourselves that they are at all related. The markets themselves are going to do what the money does, and the money being more controlled by the smaller people continue to bring that as a big part of it. So let's not confuse these numbers, and this is where I think that President Trump makes an error in judgment at bragging about these numbers. And of course, Obama tried to take credit for some of it the other day. And again, I don't believe the president himself has anything to really do with the overall markets or any of these numbers. And I think these numbers are more or less artificial. Remember, the numbers never lie, only the people that report them do. And I think that becomes an issue that we have to consider as well when we start to look at these numbers, because when you look deep into them, you don't have real growth. All right, and remember that most of this growth is created at a zero interest rate environment, or 1%, whatever, which is totally ridiculous on its own. So as I look into the numbers, I go, okay, fine, they were decent, but are they really decent? And I think that's the bigger story that we need to look into is what do they really mean? And until the markets decide that it's time to go lower, they're going to continue to go higher. I don't have a problem with that. I understand that, and I comprehend the overall market activity. But when you look at the markets and you look at the numbers, we are in a seasonality or seasonal time that markets typically rally anyways. So I think the real story will be, what does the Fed do on Wednesday? All right, we have our two-day Fed meeting in which they're going to hike rates. Now, the hike, I think, has probably already been priced in, but the bigger question will be is, what does the language state going forward? That'll be the story for the IMBs at the Fed. We're sure that Janet Yellen in her last meeting does not want to rock the boat. We're sure that it's going to be, fairly stoic. But again, the real key will be the language and how many rate increases are planned in for next year. That would be more of the story. But at the point of the markets where we are, at the point where we see things going crazy, let's look around the globe and okay, we hear the constant daily bantering of global growth is phenomenal. Okay, again, I would like to see it, and I urge anybody, if it's out there, to comment on the site or to send me an email direct at bubba@bubbatrading.com. I would like to know what I am not seeing. I am seeing a new tax plan that is trash, that does not help small business. And without small business, you don't get the true growth that you're looking for. That becomes a problem in my eyes. I don't see, people moving forward. I see people making less money, having more of a struggle to get through and to live day to day. I see more people exhausting whatever savings they were able to put away, not being able to. I think I see a smaller demand for many things. So as we look at the bigger picture, are we really better off, or are we still in this totally Fed-driven market that is only being priced higher because of the amount of cheap money that is still available? I think this is one of the things that you're seeing based on what the Bitcoin is telling you. I think Bitcoin is telling you that there's some sort of a revolution going on. Bitcoin obviously had a major move last week. I think we saw some 19,000 prints at some of the exchanges. I think one of the other things you have to think about and look at from a Bitcoin standpoint is the futures going to help or hurt the Bitcoin? Is that model going to be good? And I think this is another issue of a market that is more manipulated than anything else, because now in the Bitcoin futures, which opened tonight, you have and most firms are using, you can only go long only. All right, so there'll be no shorting of the Bitcoin. So what does that mean? Again, here's destroying and taking away from the free market price discovery system. These to me are problems that exist that are plaguing this economy and plaguing the way that we live. And I think that is shown itself through many other areas. And you can start with the farming products. You can start with agriculture. You can start with these ridiculously low prices in soybeans and corn and wheat. Well, the soybeans not so bad, but wheat and corn for sure. I mean, these prices are getting to the 90s, 20 years ago. Right? Now, again, farmers cannot exist on these types of yields, on this type of money for what they're going to get paid. It's hardly worth planting. If you're into it's hardly worth the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week that you have to work to put this stuff together. So I think this is, again, bringing us a much bigger problem that nobody wants to talk about. And I think the problem ties back to, first of all, debt. Debt itself is growing massively, minute by minute, day by day. We continue to amass bigger debt. Our debt is significantly bigger than the debt that caused the banking collapse in 2008. But this is the problem that you get when you bring together a free system where money is free and you don't care about debt. And this is where, again, we get into the too big to fail system of allowing banks to create this massive amount of debt, which at the end of the day does nobody any good. When is it that we need to start to live within the means of what we have? When are we going to worry about the pension funds that are going bust, that aren't going to be able to help the people that are going to retire? When is this Ponzi scheme that has been created by the Federal Reserve going to bust? Again, everything busts eventually. And I'm not telling you it's going to be tomorrow. I'm just telling you that it's 100% certainty, in fact, that we're going to see the overall system break. When does it break and how does it break? Why, I think, as we just said, part of it, you're seeing it in the excitement and in the movement in the cryptocurrencies, because the cryptocurrency are exploding higher, which is trying to eliminate and cut out the Fed. And don't think the big bankers aren't worried about this, because this cuts into their free money and into their business. One of the things that I think I find very disturbing is that banks can exist and they make money no matter what. They make bad loans, they make money. They make good loans, they make money. It doesn't really matter, because what do they have? They've got the Ponzi scheme going, and where the Fed will create new money to save them because they're too big to fail, or they create their own money by over-lending what they have to begin with. Fractional banking is another joke of a system that allows you to create more money out there that doesn't really exist. And I think that becomes some of the problems that are more the untold stories of this. So yes, the stock markets are going straight up and continue to go up, but I think they're starting to show some real weakness. I think you're starting to see some chinks in the armor, as we say, and some reasons to expect a market to sell off. Now again, we're not going to predict it today, but when you watch and you look at what we call the tape, you see things happening that are totally illogical. Again, very similar to the 90s in the internet bubble. Even stocks, everybody talks about the bubble in Bitcoin, all right? And again, I agree that it's in a bubble. I agree that chart pattern is a joke and that there's going to be some sort of a sell-off. But I ask you this question, all right? Once it sells off, will it just collapse? Is it a scheme? Is it a scam? Is it a Ponzi scheme? And I would venture to say the answer would be no. I think that the real benefit or the real life of the crypto space is now showing its head. And I think that's kind of the financial revolution that we're seeing, because a lot of money is moving into that crypto space. And it's been totally bonkers. Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, the movement that we see here is totally a joke. I think last week at one point it had a 40% move in 40 minutes. Now, again, that is it. One of the things about it is truly designed as a free market. Okay, so it is a free market system. But in the meantime, we're going to come back and talk more about Bitcoin and more about what's going on in the markets when we come back from the break. This is Bubba's Bottom Line, Todd Bubba Horwitz. And of course, I want to remind you to check out highschoolinvesting.com. We're in 300 high schools now. We want to get into obviously 30,000. We do it as a freebie. I finance it all, and I now have trouble financing it all. I do need some help, and if you want to help out, you can go to Patreon, Patreon, .com/Bubba Trading, and go ahead and see what's going on and help us out. And of course, for those who do, we give you a special webinar and also an autographed copy of my book. And of course, a couple of shout out to my friend Wisconsin John, and my cardiologist from Canada, and my friends from Switzerland. Looking forward to seeing them in Vegas. But in the meantime, again, remember that it's all about it. Helping out, kids. That's what we're trying to do, is to educate the children. In the meantime, don't forget to get the Bubba Show every day at libertytalk.fm. You can get, I do an hour every day of radio. So go ahead and check that out, libertytalk.fm, 2 to 3 Eastern time. In the meantime, let's step out here for a break, and we'll be right back with more of Bubba's Bottom Line. Todd Bubba Horwitz will be right back. Welcome back to Bubba's Bottom Line, and of course, Todd Bubba Horwitz here. What could be better? All right. So, as we talked about, Bitcoin before we went to the break, and of course, it's kind of the topic. It's now on the news wires every day. All right. Bitcoin has become mainstream from a news standpoint. And of course, last week there was a hack at one of the servers or whatever, that about $70 million. Okay. Hey, it didn't bother. That same day, Bitcoin did trade over that 19,000 level. You've got a lot of people trying to push it up, and there is a story out there. I cannot confirm it. I cannot deny it. But the story is that Bitcoin that 40% of it is controlled by a small amount of people. Now, I know, of course, the Winklevoss twins have said that it's going into the trillions, as a total market cap value. Why wouldn't they say that? Again, remember, people have in their minds a way to talk their own book and create you. So when you look at the market, is it bubbly? Is it going up too fast? Yes and yes. Is it going to be real? That's the one thing nobody really knows for sure, because you're going to have a major battle against the regulators. They're going to try to sniff their way in here and put some controls on it. Now, I don't believe that they can. I do believe, though, that the Bitcoin is really hurting the precious metals field. I believe that gold and silver are under tremendous pressure, as we saw last week when gold broke down, that Bitcoin is may or may not becoming the new safety asset being used by many. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with it. I'm just saying that is apparently where the money is flowing into and why you're seeing so much pressure on the gold markets. I think that when you watch how this trades, I think you're seeing the new money that might normally flow into gold because of some fear is no longer flowing. It's flowing into Bitcoin. Now, obviously, Bitcoin is what it is. We don't really know all the finer details. Gold and silver, you can still put them in your hands. So again, it's kind of a weird situation, but it is the sign of a financial revolution. And you're seeing a lot of dough move into that Bitcoin just because. Now, if you look at any market, and you look at we can call them the three stages of the market. So the Bitcoin started out, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. Okay, this rally also started out, let's say, 8 years ago. So you had the smart money or the fund money rolling in early and buying. And of course, that continued to mushroom as we got into the second phase of that market, where you now had the brokers and advisors putting their clients into it. And now you've got the retail at the end. Now, I would venture to say that not only do we have that same problem in the stock markets and in Bitcoin, I think that this is where you see the end is near. Now, to try to predict when that end is going to come would be totally irresponsible of me to even suggest that there's a time and when it's going to end. But it will end, and it will, as it always does, and it will end ugly. Now, again, you cannot continue to bargain and say that jobs are great. You cannot continue to say that it's not a bubble. You cannot continue to say that these earnings now, and one of the things you look at is everybody brags on how good earnings are and how good the earnings season is. But if you look at the PE ratios, if you look at the EBITDA, if you look at all the different things of companies, and you tie in zero interest rates to go along with that, that does not bode well for a longer term future. What we're seeing here is that the massive amounts of debts being created time after time, and every market ends with bad debt. That is the end of it. But again, this is one of the things that you can't control, and this is one of the things about a Ponzi scheme that you can't control, is when is it going to end? It's going to end. It's just a question of when does that end, and I think that's the problem that we find in the market, is trying to figure out when it's going to end. And I think the best course of action for anybody trying to trade this market is to just trade the flow and trade the money, and not try to predict that tomorrow's the end of the world. I think this is where you get into being hedged on a regular basis so that it doesn't really matter. You are participating as the markets continue to rally, and this rally is ridiculous, but it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm long the market. I don't have a problem with it. I'm not getting hurt by it. I don't like the market, and I sell it short term, but long term, I'm still in. And I think this is where we always tend to get into a problem, is because this late money that's coming in, this we'll call it dumb money for lack of a better word, is not healthy for the overall system. And that's typically the end, because I think a lot of the smarter money is now already starting to liquidate out. You've seen some pressure in stocks like Amazon and Apple over the last few weeks. Now, that's to me is a sign that a lot of the smarter money is pushing out. You remember the movie Trading Places, and they were buying the orange juice futures, and they peaked, and all of a sudden, even though they thought they should continue to go higher, and they started to go lower. That's the new paradigm. Markets go up, and the bubble it creates. Now they start to come down a little bit. Now they're not collapsing down, but they're coming down a little bit, and everybody's saying, well, that can't be right. Okay, that can't be right, Mortimer says to Randolph, but that's kind of how it happens. And we tend to ignore the real facts of the market and what's really underneath it, because what happens? Greed gets in the way, as it always does. Again, the markets run on fear and greed. That's the way that it runs, and that's the way that it works. So, are the earnings going to continue? And are we going, but the bigger question is, are we going to see any real growth? And I think that's the real problem. And I think that's where the Federal Reserve is going to come in, and that will be Wednesday at 2 Eastern time. they're going to come out with their announcement on interest rates. And like I said, the Fed funds rate are pricing in a 92% chance that they're going to hike rates. And please do. We need to have higher rates. This is another issue that nobody ever wants to discuss, is the lack of funding or capital available for small business. Because of the low rate, the banks don't want to take a chance because the spread is too small. So this is another issue that we continue to ignore and try to sweep underneath the rug on a regular basis. And that's where I find things to be more troubling, is the lack of concern. And I've said this on air, if you've watched me on Varney or whatever, I go, how come nobody worries about the debt? How come nobody worries about how much we owe? Why is this tax plan not accounting to try to reduce some of the debt instead of continuing to add on to it? What do we think is going to happen? Is it going to magically disappear all of a sudden? No. This is where we have the major problems. This is what we're talking about. And this is where we don't get the proper satisfaction of how to really control this system, which goes back to the fact that the Fed has no freaking idea of what they're doing. Right? They have no clue how to handle a market that is of this. Now, you know they're going to make the wrong decision when they do. And of course, what's going to happen is they're going to go, they've already should have been hiking all along. And of course, they kept stalling it. So what's going to happen is they're going to have to hike too fast when it gets down to it. And the economy is going to change. And of course, you're going to see some major selling. Now, again, when is that going to be? I don't have any idea. I'm not even going to try to attempt to make a guess as to when that will happen. But what I will say is that it will happen, as it always does. And the Fed will be in the center of it because they're going to make decisions that are going to punish the markets. They've now fed them for 8 years. They're going to be in that position to punish them going forward. And I think this is the biggest problem that nobody ever wants to talk about, all right, is that the Fed is clueless, that the Fed has no idea. Because again, the people that are benefiting most are happy. They just want to keep their mouth shut. They let the Fed continue to put their foot in their mouth. All right. So we'll see what they have to say on Wednesday. All right. But as you continue to watch, all right, you've got a lot of things that are going on underneath the surface here. And a lot of these big companies that have had major runs, like NVIDIA and some others, are tied directly to Bitcoin. Square, NVIDIA, and others. And I think it'll be interesting to watch how they start to trade as we start to see the futures market to start to trade in Bitcoin. Again, I believe that Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies are here to stay. I believe that we're going to see more and more of this transfer from dollars to Bitcoin, because I believe that people appreciate the more free market and the less intervention. Because like the price of it or not, at least it trades 24 hours a day and there's no intervention. So if we can live with it that way, and then we'll see. And again, this is a problem as money flows from one asset to another. But I think when you look at it, again, I don't own any, unfortunately. I would have liked to have bought some a long time ago. I didn't, because I didn't believe in it back in the day. Now I understand it better, and I think that the technology is, a lot of it's already being used. I think that you're going to see this is going to be real, and I think this is going to cause a lot of heat, and a lot of grief, and a lot of problems for the Fed and for the banking system, because that's going to take away money from them. But we'll see how that all trades out over time. We'll watch. Again, I think that you got to be careful, and of course, be careful on these futures markets, because a lot of the firms are giving you long-only opportunities, which is not a good thing because you're forced on one side. So there's a lot of things to be worked out here, just like there's a lot of things to be worked out in the market. But at the end of the day, we do believe that the tops of the markets are generally in. Doesn't mean they can't sneak out a little bit. We do believe the bottoms are in the grain markets. We do believe that the cattle markets look like they're getting ready to turn and go to the other side. We think hogs have a little bit more room to go on the downside. But overall, we'd like to start to see a short position start to build for the short term. Again, I'm not doing anything with my long term. It's just the short term. I'm hedging my long and trying to shorten the short term. But in the meantime, I'm going to step out here for a break and come back with my commentary. This is Bubba's Bottom Line. Todd Bubba Horwitz. We're going to step out here and come right back. In the meantime, remember, highschoolinvesting.com. We're trying to continue to educate and make our high school kids financially literate so that we can get through this and so that our next generation of financiers and Fed members at least have an understanding on how markets work. If you want to help out, go to Patreon, patreon.com/Bubba Trading. And you can sign up. And of course, for those who go to reach the certain levels, we're going to do a free webinar, as well as you get an autographed copy of my book. And don't forget to get the Bubba Show every day from 2 to 3 Eastern at libertytalk.fm. This is Bubba's Bottom Line. Todd Bubba Horwitz will be right back with more after the break. Welcome back to Bubba's Bottom Line. Todd Bubba Horwitz. And of course, what would a day be without my commentary? All right. And you know, there's so many things that I could comment on. I don't even know where to start, but I'm gonna start with this whole mess that has been created with the abuse on women, the bullying, and the fake news. It's kind of a little bit of a combination shot, and I think this has really been creating more problems. And I have to ask the question, whether you like President Donald Trump or not, is he not trying to do the things that are best for the overall country? All right. Again, I believe that he is trying to do what he believes to be best for Americans. I believe that from deep down inside that's his agenda. I don't believe he's left or right. I believe he's a center guy. I believe you could call him Ronald Reagan with a little bit bigger mouth and a little bit more aggressive. But at the end of the day, what is wrong with people like Chelsea Handler? All right. What kind of moron and Momo is she that she decides that she wants to try to bully and pick on Sarah Huckabee Sanders? Okay, when did we decide that using the media to pick on people became an acceptable way of life? I don't understand where she gets off, and this is, I think, really creates a bigger problem in the world, is when you allow these morons to start hammering away and bullying people, criticizing them openly for their appearance. All right. I mean, Chelsea, have you looked in the mirror recently? I think that one of the things that is important, and one of the things that is so demeaning, is the allowing of this bullying of outside people into silly things. I don't understand how we even accept that. I don't think it's funny. I don't think it was enjoyable. I think that, again, the fake news tied in with the online bullying, the Twitter tweeting videos and all these things of nonsense becomes a much bigger thing. And I think one of the big problems is a lot of people depend on this news. And of course, when it's fake, it creates a much bigger story and creates more problems in the economy. And again, we have freedom of speech, and I'm not trying to eliminate any of that, but I do think that it's bullying. I think it's hurtful, and I think that it's a sad state of affairs when people go to the internet or whatever, as the cyber bullying goes. And I think that the allowance of fake news, I think that news, whether if it's an opinion piece, then you're obviously allowed to say what you want to say. But if it's supposed to be represented as fact, I think that needs to be more looked into. I think that when we're not reporting factual news, I think that becomes a much bigger issue. So I think that these are things that are becoming more problematic. And of course, it's once again creating a greater divide between Americans. And I don't know why when we decided that we have to be either far left or far right, because again, I'm not forgiving anybody on the right. Okay, I just believe that there's so much more, and the media is so much more biased left, that they're going to go ahead and report more of this fake news, trying to bring down President Donald Trump and what his agenda is. And I think that, to me, becomes the bigger problem. I think that when you look at what his agenda is, I think his agenda is meant to benefit all Americans. All right, I don't like the tax plan. I've said that before. I'm not defending anything, but saying that when you make it so hard because of the system that we live in, and you allow all this fake news to drag others in, and you ignore everything, I mean, it becomes a much bigger problem. I mean, we know that Comey was not straight up. We know about Hillary Clinton. All right, we know about a lot of the fake news that's going on, but yet it continues to blossom, and it continues to be reported by the major outlets that are already known to be on the left. All right. Now, again, I thought that stories were supposed to be neutral and the news was supposed to be reported. I did not know when we switched from all the straight news to picking it aside and reporting the news to your side. But I think what you are seeing now is, again, if you go back to this cyberbullying, if you go back to these men taking advantage of women, Matt Lauer, another jamoke. I mean, really, I mean, but you think that this just hasn't begun. This has just begun. So now to have somebody like a Chelsea Handler now start on with, you know, on Sarah Huckabee Sanders, it reminds me of Hillary Clinton destroying all those women that Bill was diddling with. All right. So again, I find it hard to believe that it's acceptable from one party and not acceptable from another. It becomes a problem, and I think the Al Franken resignation was a ploy. I think it had nothing to do with anything, and it's a direct shot, another shot trying to weasel out, and instead of support our president and support our country, we want to waste another 3, 4, 5 years or 8 years in nonsense instead of trying to make America great again. I think that's a bigger problem, and I think these are all problems that need to be addressed at some point in time, because this is not the true America, and we are dividing among ourselves, and I think that's a bigger problem. And that's it for today's Bubba's Bottom Line. Todd Bubba Horwitz, as always, thank you so much. Everybody have a great week, and we'll see you during the week for the daily updates, and we'll see you back next week for Bubba's Bottom Line. Have a great day, everybody. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much. We'll see you later.